Hey there, welcome to episode 122 of the FFS Talk audio program. I'm your host, Dan Hugo. We're recording this late in the day, 3:46 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time here in the Greater Vegas area on Thursday, March 26, 2026. We normally publish new episodes of FFS Talk on Thursdays, but usually closer to the morning. So, got a late start today. Could have recorded it last night. FFS. Today's title and topic, lane assignments. We're not talking about driving, despite the cover art. If you do happen to look at the cover art, it's important to realize that the lanes have more K-rails than normal. Lane assignments. Episode 122. Hey, if you're not familiar with the FFS Talk audio program, what is this? By design, to be a conversation, a debate, an argument about what works, what does not, and what we might do about it. It's intended to foster conversation and consideration. To date, there have only been 122 episodes that are solo. That is, there have been no guests to present the arguments or the debate. Why is this? Well, to be honest, I really don't look for guests yet. And it's been more fun to just talk about different topics. What this is, though, is planting of seeds. Should anyone want to debate or argue, you can consume any or all of the previous episodes, or this one, or all of them in totality, and get the basic idea of what my argument or arguments might be, so that you can bring your own. In the meantime, I get to talk about whatever I want to talk about, which is also fun. So, hey, if you're not familiar with what FFS means, by the way, it is an abbreviation. It's something you probably will hear in Ireland, maybe elsewhere. There are a lot of Irish people out in the world. If you're not familiar with what it means, you should hang out with some of those Irish people. Hopefully, wherever you found this audio program, you're able to locate the episode description, which contains the show notes, including a brief summary, one long sentence. It's not really that long. And then 2 channel or show links. I don't have any links about psychology or confirmation bias or availability heuristics or anything like that. I've talked about these things a lot over time. We'll save those for if I actually have a conversation about this with someone, because I think this is actually a topic that is fairly meaningful and very accessible, but we'll see. So let's get on with the show then. We have no time to waste. Before you know it, it'll be next Thursday. And shall we begin then? Summary of today's episode. We have all heard the expression, stay in your lane, or something similar. And there's a different side to that coin, and this is about both. The FFS Talk homepage, ffstalk.com, a website that's in dire need of beautification. I know. A profile page linking everything. We're coming up on the end of March, but I did register my buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo profile page in March of 2021. So 5 years old. Come April, I will not be able to say that so directly. Oh, so 5 years and 1 month. So 5 years. I still use it. Only for the very basics. You can find links to all of my audio productions, various projects, affiliate links if you're curious, products I actually use. It's only a few, don't worry. Some biographical information, and don't forget the Buy Me an Update audio program is published at buymeacoffee.com/danhugo/posts first before it makes its way to the other usual podcast platforms, Apple, Apple, Amazon, Spotify, RSS feed. There's a YouTube channel with podcast posts. You got it all. So these and more are all linked here. buymeacoffee.com/danhugo. You do not have to spend any money. But if you do, any proceeds do go towards coffee and coffee accessories, which is what powers my various undertakings. Okay, I had to pause and get some water. I think we're good to go. So those are the links. No additional links today. Coming and going. The expression "stay in your lane" is something one might say, or perhaps one might hear, when there is a sense that someone is, or maybe you, are taking some liberties with their authority. There may be any number of well-known examples about podcasters becoming epidemiologists and virologists and immunologists, all from listening to their guests or forming their own opinions and then sharing them as though they are authoritative. There are countless other examples, of course. Here, the podcaster lane and the biosciences lane are not on the same road system. Now there is an exception. This is something that people must be aware of. There's an exception that some bioscientists also have podcasts. So the false equivalence of, oh, you're a podcaster, so you must understand how vaccines work. And we're not going to cover that topic much, but there's a website called microbe.tv, and there's an actual doctor, and does he have his PhD? I don't know if he's a clinician, but certainly a research scientist, a PhD, I think. I didn't look this up, but it's Dr. Vincent Racaniello, and he has a podcast, Microbe TV, and he has on a panel of other subject matter experts, virology, immunology, various other, whatever topics, and he has an actual physician, Dr. Daniel Griffin, I think it is. I'm totally ad-libbing this stuff, but I used to listen to that all the time during the, that one time a few years ago. These are people who actually know what they're doing, and they created a podcast. So we cannot provide that false equivalence. We cannot, where we say, oh, you're a podcaster, therefore you both know the same things. So I hope people don't actually do that. But that's an example where a podcaster is actually credible. And that's an important distinction. There's another version of this, though, where hey, stay in your lane, where someone is behaving outside of their lane, assuming credibility and presenting themselves as expert and so on. But the other version of this, I'm arguing this, you may disagree, hint, where someone who is perceived as an expert or at least very knowledgeable on some topic is presented with questions or asks of some kind, like, can you do this for me? In other areas, which may be related or maybe not to the actual topic of expertise. If you are the family IT person, for example, you may have heard a request that begins with, you're in computers, right? You're into computers, or both. Or maybe something more typical like, you have a podcast, right? Should I get a flu shot this year? Haha. So there are possibilities from both sides to have a particular area of expertise, a collection of insights based on practical knowledge or academic training, just a strong interest or perceived credibility, whatever it is, turn into a broader scoped presumptive authority that isn't actually there, right? Again, you're a podcaster. What kind of house should I buy? Or maybe it is a little bit, or maybe a lot. Maybe that authority is there, or maybe a lot. This could be where transparency steps in. So again, if you happen to be a virology professor or a research scientist or a clinician practicing, now not just a clinician. So here's a tricky thing, and I promise I won't do too much vaccination. If you're a clinician or a doctor, you have a practice, you're in a hospital, you are not an epidemiologist. You're not a virologist. You're not a immunologist. You are, maybe, unless you actually are. Maybe you're a general practitioner. Maybe you're eyes, ears, nose, and throat. Maybe you're an exercise physiologist, whatever it is, whatever your focus areas are, right? You deal with bones, joints, lungs, whatever it is. But you are not collecting the data that an epidemiologist collects. So anecdotally, a doctor may say, well, my patients in the hospital are doing this. But epidemiology is about statistical research, capturing data, double-blind, proper data treatment, correct timestamps, and all that. So anecdotal data cannot be given weight, cannot be given assigned credibility, because it is given by a doctor who is not seeing the entire terrain of a pandemic, for example. So it's important to understand what these boundaries are, and it's important to be transparent about them. So if I can editorialize for just 1 second, I think when people say, well, I'm a doctor, therefore I have this expertise, I think it's important to delineate where the boundaries are, right? I'm a doctor practicing in one place. A pandemic is global. There's a lot of conditions that are being, and this is a novel virus and so on. So there was a lot of credibility mistakenly assigned. That's where you get into like, what is your background? Are you actually licensed? That Dr. Daniel Griffin, like I referred to earlier, he's a clinician practicing medicine, but he also happens to work in a research capacity as well. So he had insights kind of that straddle the fence of sorts. But they were always very upfront about who was an expert in what and who was working on what and so on. So that's probably one of the differences, is that real experts actually tell you, and they're happy to tell you. And sometimes they even push back if you're going outside of those boundaries. We'll talk about that at the end. So what works? And again, the format of the show: what works, what doesn't, what can we do about it? So moving one lane over is sometimes not so bad, possibly even appropriate. Some topics do lend themselves to adjacent expertise, and when this is the case, it is often useful to make use of that adjacency, especially if that is disclosed, right? Oh, I do know this, maybe I can help with that. I'm not an expert in that, but I am an expert in this, and they're related in some ways. And then know the limits. Suppose there was a veterinarian on a camping trip and someone is injured, some human is injured. Can that veterinarian render medical assistance for the injured human? There's nobody else around. There's no physicians available. You're some distance away from medical treatment. Emergency response is on its way. Yes, you can. Under Good Samaritan laws, at least, and this is not legal advice by any means, but by the way, you can actually Google this, and that's the response you'll probably get, is that Good Samaritan laws at least apply. So in that case, you are not necessarily treating a patient. In fact, you would not be allowed to do that. But you are a normal person who happens to have some skills that could apply to life-saving or similar in an emergency. So of course, that's an adjacent skill that's highly relevant and would be useful. You'll see the same things when, for example, like a registered nurse, or maybe it'll be somebody who's not necessarily in surgeries or has so much training, but if you have some, maybe you're a paramedic, or maybe you are maybe you're a CERT volunteer. I'm a CERT volunteer, right? We are absolutely not medically trained, but we do have, they provide as part of the CERT training, very basic splinting and helping people to stop bleeding, very basic services when someone is injured, to get them to a central location for engagement with the first responders if and when they show up. So there are various skills that could apply, or various abilities, or various pieces of knowledge that could apply if you as the possessor of such things, and or the other individuals who are in need of such things, as long as everybody understands where everything is, right? Oh, I'm not a doctor, but I can do these things. If you convince them that that's true, great. So generally speaking, there are times when adjacent skills and knowledge and so on is reasonable. Lean over into another lane. When it comes to technical, and by the way, I'm no expert in any of this, so these are more things to talk about again. So if you would like to debate my statements, that's the whole nature of this the program. When it comes to technical or specialized fields, more generally, not medical per se, but anything that's a little bit more than I know how to read, it is possible for many to lean into another lane because of the similarity of the training or tools or methodology and so on. A science teacher, and we're recording this around the time when Project Hail Mary comes out, so sometimes a science teacher, maybe a high school science teacher, they're not an immunologist, but a science teacher might be completely familiar with the research publication process, scientific method, of course, hopefully, double-blind studies, and so on. So they know what they're reading from a little bit more technical standpoint, so that a science teacher could have an informed, though not expert nor authoritative opinion on a vaccine, for example, or some other medical issue based on published studies and other details. So they could read those with a more technical or savvy eye and form some opinion. It doesn't make them an expert. It doesn't make them a competitive debater in medical issues, or like debating immunology. I'm a science teacher. I can read the studies. Famously, what's his name? Destiny. I don't know his real name. I can't remember. Destiny is known for being the Wikipedia debater. So he'll pull up Wikipedia information during a debate to form his arguments. Okay. That doesn't make him an expert in anything he's talking about. It makes him an expert in retrieving argument bases, for better or worse. Right. So hopefully a science teacher would be a little bit more selective about the information they're consuming to form opinions, but so they just have a little bit more insight than a casual consumer. But that doesn't make them an expert in immunology because they know how to read a research paper. I myself consider, but I would place myself in that sort of bin, that I do know how to read research papers and so on, just from my academic science and I'll just say STEM. I've just had so much exposure to technical documents and research papers and so on. Does it make me an expert in any of this stuff? Absolutely not. But I can sort of suss out some troubling statements, and other times I'll locate an obscure research document that has some useful information. Okay, great. Still doesn't make me an expert by any means. So here's where disclosure and transparency are still important, of course. But having some familiarity can often lead to useful questions at the beginning of a deeper dive, so that science teacher would know, hey, I found here that you only did a meta study across these other 5 studies, and those other 5 studies are a little bit questionable because I read all of those too. Aha, now we can start having a real conversation. Maybe we can bring in a few experts and see where things fall. This might be where the family IT person tries to help out with a Windows issue when they are really all Linux, the voice of experience, so that knowing which questions to ask and where to look are vastly more useful than zero insight. Right? I don't know anything about Windows, but I do know a ton of stuff about adjacent things that might be helpful. We can start looking, that kind of thing. So you can still be helpful in a useful way and still remain in your lane. I claim zero Windows insight or expertise, but I do know how computers work. So that's a starting point. Then there are the tireless researchers, the people who develop a real serious interest and thus awareness, maybe even some insight about a topic or topics, so that they might actually be an authority of sorts. And I sometimes think, like, this is not a good argument, but there was a time when no one knew anything about calculus because there wasn't calculus. And then Sir Isaac Newton stayed home for during a different pandemic, invented calculus to solve some other problems. So he's completely self-taught. So to claim that, well, he never went to school for that, like, well, there wasn't one. So you can't really make that argument today because there's just a vast array of information resources and expertise on so many things. But it is possible still to discover something or to develop some insights based on just real research. Do you have to go to school to get that? No. So it depends. School is really useful for certification or licensing and whatnot. But some people are just natural learners. And when you think about it, school is really just referring to standing on the shoulders of giants, if you will, from Sir Isaac Newton. So referring to things that people have written. I interrupted myself there. I didn't edit that. So a lot of education comes from learning from what has been learned. So yeah, depends on the individual perhaps. So they might actually be an authority of sorts though. So here it's certainly a gray area. Sometimes like a history buff, someone who's really into history, they go and learn everything about a particular time frame or whatever, some region or some series of events. You have your Civil War reenactors who know everything about everything that happened in a particular battle. Maybe they don't know the reason for the war, but they know what happened on that field on that day, etc. So the buff who learns everything goes to relevant sites, websites, and physical sites, interviews other historians, has historian experts in a time period or a facet of the, whatever the area of research is. And they are eventually reliable resources to ask questions of. Nowadays, maybe they'd be a history explainer, but, not a credentialed expert, hasn't written a PhD dissertation, but certainly knows their stuff, knows their way around. I think maybe a kind of weird example of this would be Stephen Colbert from The Late Show, I think it is, CBS. Stephen Colbert is famously a self-proclaimed expert in the Tolkien works, The Lord of the Rings, etc., to the point where he can quote passages, knows the characters, the stories, the interconnections, and so on. He's not credentialed in that, but certainly if you ask him a question about it, he knows the answer. So these are possibilities. There are people who just develop, lived experience, hands-on. Is there a difference between this person and an academic historian in the history buff example? Probably. There's probably a question about rigor being judged literally with like peer-reviewed publications, or maybe that dissertation gets some serious examination and so on. And there's something to be said about, like I said, rigor, but also just knowing, like learning from your peers around you. So if you're surrounded by other people that are doing similar things in an academic institution, the environment is just a little bit different. So there's probably some difference. But from a history or there are a lot of topics like this where you just, self-taught programmers, they know a lot of stuff, but they don't know a lot of other stuff. And you'll encounter that in real life if you are a software engineer, perhaps. I'm self-taught. Like, okay, yeah, then you probably don't know these 10 things. But can we apply the same thing to medicine, maybe law? Probably not. This is where the podcaster label is not always a detractor. Sometimes the podcaster knows a lot more than the listeners. And again, sometimes trained and licensed experts produce podcasts. So knowing a ton of stuff legitimately is still valid, and is still, you can become an explainer, a history explainer. You just won't be a history professor or similar. You can be a history podcaster, and you can also be a history professor who is also a podcaster. Now, not all of this is strawberry and cream. What does not work? The big problem we all encounter frequently, whether we know it or not, is the known expert in some field assuming credibility to speak with authority in some other field about which they are not expert. There are more and more examples of this all the time. I could pick on Sabine Hassenfelder because she is a well-known physicist and a YouTuber who frequently will stray from her areas of expertise and render opinions on things that are a little bit out there, to say the least. So one, which I'm not even going to link to because it was so ridiculous, she created a video about economics and claimed the origin story for, currency. Currency is formed to replace bartering, which is not true. That does happen, but that's not the motivation for creating currency. So there's all kinds of finer points that she kind of glossed over. Some of it was probably, of course, everybody knows that. I'm just going to say it. But it was clear that she had not done actual research. I am not an economist, an expert in an expert in economics? Yeah. Not an expert in economics. I hold no degrees. I did a minor concentration. So you could say some slice of my degree pizza is focused on economics. And I've certainly read a lot, and I've certainly become familiar with a lot of the way money works and the way economies work and all that. I'm not an expert. I wouldn't go publishing books about it. But during her presentation, it was very clear that she should not do those things either. Even though she could run circles around me and a lot of people when it comes to physics. So, and she will have her detractors around physics as well, and that's totally fine. That's how that works. But she got many things wrong. This is using reputation and expertise in one area to opine on a completely different topic or topic area, which might be interesting with explicit disclosure. Something like, I am not an expert in this area, just expressing my opinion, because she has an audience and she has the ability to create and express an opinion or derive and express an opinion. That's not the problem. The problem is not saying up front. And I think there's probably a presumption. You all know I'm a physicist, not an economist, but I'm going to tell you some things. But she tried, maybe this was just a habit. I don't want to be an apologist, but it seemed as though she was maybe lecturing on economics as though she would lecture on, or as she would lecture in physics. And it was just a very different thing, right? What you're saying right now doesn't make any sense, because you probably didn't do the amount of research you would have on a new physics topic. So I think this happens more frequently than we know, and we may even do it more frequently than we know. I'm not an expert in this area. I'm just expressing my opinion. Anyone can do that. So I don't want to say that she should never talk about economics, but right up front, I don't know what I'm talking about. I'm just going to give you my opinion based on what I've seen and what I remember. That would have been a completely different episode. Like, okay. Oh, yeah, okay, a couple of those things are wrong. Maybe you want to brush up on the origin story of money, which is created through tax. Once you have control, you have a sovereign currency, the government can dictate how money is spent and so on. There's a whole bunch of stuff that goes on that isn't about bartering. It's about the function of a country and its economy. Anyway, that's a different topic for a different day. For what it's worth, I do this often. Most people could perhaps. I always say during my audio programs, sometimes more obviously or more pronounced, that I don't know what I'm talking about, that I'm just rendering an opinion. If we're going to talk about computers, I'm far more knowledgeable just from hands-on, plus my academic background. If we're going to talk about mechanical engineering, more academic, not so much practical experience. And then if we get outside of those areas, I don't really have a lot of academic experience. I don't have a lot of real-world experience in most topics. So some academia, but over the years, you develop a certain interest in history or economics and so on. So it's important to know these things going into a conversation or debate or an argument. And certainly if someone asks advice, or if they presume that you are qualified to give advice, and that doesn't always happen. So that's a problem sometimes, where people don't know which lane they're supposed to be in, or other people don't know which lane you're supposed to be in, and that you should stay in it. I had to pause again, get some water. The weather is nuts in Vegas right now. My temperature shows 94 Fahrenheit or so. It's a little warm for spring. Record-breaking March, by the way. I'm not a weather person. I read that. It's probably true. There is a less obvious, but perhaps as prevalent scenario where someone who works in some role with some expertise might have some familiarity or insight, or maybe not, in some other related area, and they might be called upon to render their opinion, or they might offer it, right? So you have both sides of that coin again. Suppose you are in the market to buy a home, and this is an actual example that I've encountered, that where you ask a real estate agent a question that is really a contract law question, for example. You would want to get an attorney to render an opinion, and your real estate agent might provide the answer, or an answer. The agent could also offer some insight unprompted. They may say, well, when you, if you do decide to buy, the contract is such that it may not be clear to either party that offering this sort of advice is inappropriate at best and possibly illegal. You kind of have to know exact circumstances, specific details. You got to read the whole contract. You got to read the entire, you have to know a lot more about the transaction that could take place. So if you just render an opinion sight unseen, not knowing those details and so on, that could be a real problem. And if nobody knows to even consider that, that's another problem. The reason this sort of transaction might occur are several. I guess the reasons, I wrote reasons. Maybe politeness, like, okay, I'll answer the question, but I really shouldn't, but I don't want to upset anybody. We're in the middle of a deal. Misplaced confidence. Oh, I've done this countless times. I've worked with real estate. Oh, excuse me, I had to pause, and my throat is going nuts. So sorry if my voice is going crazy for you on your end. So if you're, you may be so familiar that you don't know and whatnot. Politeness, misplaced confidence, motivation to close a business deal. Yeah, I'll just give you an answer because I know it's been like this every other time. But maybe you're going to be wrong here. If you steer somebody in the wrong direction, or again, if you're on the other side, okay, before I sign, is it okay that I have this circumstance or whatever when I sign this contract? You might want to close that deal. So you give a response that you're pretty confident in, but you don't express that lack of confidence. If there is, well, first of all, you shouldn't be rendering that advice. You're giving what could be construed as legal advice when you are not licensed to practice law, for example. The same can happen with medicine and so on. It's not an emergency. You're not saving someone's life by giving them bad advice, or so the doctor situation, medical aid situation is a little bit different, but similarly, just because I know how to put a Band-Aid on does not mean I should be able to remove sutures from your finger. You should go to a hospital or have a doctor do that for you. So I'm not practicing medicine without a license. So a lot of times people, if it's not a dire situation like that, people will sometimes either assign credibility or assume credibility for the sake of expedience, or even just be polite or friendly, or, to help out, to feel like they're doing something good. These are not necessarily malicious, but they're still problematic when these sorts of things happen. So that's a problem when people go to a different lane for whatever reason, and other people say, okay, or they ask them, hey, can you help me with this? And you don't say, well, I'm not really qualified to answer that question or help you with this task. It's not everything is helping to move a couch, which is an analogy I use often. Perhaps the most vexing of late is 2026. The amateur expert moving beyond their depth, where again, one might assign credibility or assume it is, for the sake of ego, business, or perhaps something else. So, everybody's on the same page suddenly, that I know what I'm talking about, or hey, he knows what he's talking about. And then build out from there so that there is a presumption of universal expertise only because popularity, presentation, maybe a form of groupthink can all combine to lend far more credibility than has actually been earned. So, and, this can start with somebody who is a legitimately self-taught, life experienced person with insights and knowledge and a level of expertise and credibility that has been earned. But then you can, maybe mistakenly give the impression, or the impression will be made for you that, oh, you probably are good at everything. Maybe you're one of those people that just knows everything and can answer any question. No, those are rare. Certainly with the same level of expertise across all areas. But this is not always obvious, or not always transparent. It's not always announced up front. Groupthink, yeah, that's always a bad part. Suppose there is a stand-up comedian who suddenly becomes the most popular podcaster in the world. I don't know who we're talking about, but just presume, if you like. I did a whole podcast about that. But just for the sake of argument, a huge audience might assign complete expert credibility across any number of topics, and the host may assume it or accept it, like, yeah, I know what I'm talking about. I'm just a guy, but I know how to ask questions, and I've talked to a lot of other people. But there is no such expertise. It's only being reasonable at asking questions and not necessarily reasonable at knowing what the answers are. So at scale, this can actually be harmful. I don't know if we can argue much against that, but there's only more examples, not just that one. So what can we do about this? On an individual basis, we can and should become familiar with what it means to be an expert, the difference between expert, certified, licensed, buff, history buff, right? I'm just intensely interested in self-taught, but I'm not an actual expert. I've never been tested. Actually, that's one of the differences, is whether you're tested, formally tested. Like anybody can put out a fire, hopefully, but not everybody should rush into a burning building because you don't know what you're doing, right? That's where people get injured and killed. So firefighters are professionals trained and tested. Amateurs with a hose, not the same thing. So people that do know what they're talking about, or who know this, will push back when someone says, oh, you probably know this other thing. And you're like, well, no, I don't, actually. When people assume that we are more informed and knowledgeable or insightful than we actually are, we should say so. We should say, well, actually, that's outside of my area of expertise. And I don't know if enough people do, or if, like the real estate agent, they just want to answer the question to be polite to a potential client or to close a deal for an actual, something we should be more. Honesty in this area is better than, I don't know. No, it's better than giving information that you should not be giving. We all need to understand confirmation bias and a few of the other biases I mentioned at the top of the show. I'm not going to go too deeply into these because we have previously, and if I tell you, it's just going to confirm your own impressions. So there are a few. Availability and motivated reasoning in general can help to shape people's views of your own credibility and vice versa, and all this. They lead us to want to believe and assign credibility from to a person for what they're saying or what they're telling us, that we agree, we are excited, oh, I knew it, or which might lead us to believe our own hype when people agreeing with us lean in more than they probably should. So maybe we're confirming the hopes and dreams or conspiracy theories of an audience, and by them becoming more interested in what we have to say, we start to believe our own, what we're spewing. Feeding an audience what they want to hear is a monetization strategy, a business decision, but this can lead to assigned credibility and so on. So my audience likes to hear about conspiracy theories, so I'm going to lean into that for the sake of monetizing, generating an income and paying my production staff and all that. So it's kind of a vicious circle, because now you're feeding the preconceived notions or the confirmation biases. So then you engage in some motivated reasoning, and before you know it, you're presenting parts of stories because you like and your audience is like, oh yes, well that's what he said or that's what she said, so it must be true. Vicious circle indeed. Here we need responsibility on the part of presenters and awareness on the part of consumers. So YouTubers and their audience, so that the nature of the information exchange is understood. And by the way, the presenter might actually be a subject matter expert. I don't want to discount that. It is important to disclose and to know across the board what is the terrain on which we are exchanging information right now. So there were people like, I cannot remember his name. I'm not even going to look it up, but people who have, for example, people who have written JFK conspiracy books. There are some people who've gathered up what other people have said. Then there are other people like, I wish I could remember his name. He passed away a few years ago. Graybeard wrote one of the books that was a basis for the JFK movie. I really want to look this up. Okay, I'm going to look it up. I'm going to look it up because I actually read the book. Oh, wait a minute. I didn't look it up. Is it Jim Mars with 2 R's? Now I'll confirm that. Confirmation bias for the win. Jim Mars. Hey, I think I was right. And Jim Mars with 2 R's wrote many books. So if he says something about the conspiracy, he has certainly done a lot of research. He's talked to a lot of people. He's become something of a luminary in that community. Does he have access to, or did he have access to the CIA documents? No. A lot of people didn't. A lot of people did. So, but he has certainly done a lot of that self-teaching, self-researching, and so on. So to consider him a subject matter expert with some caveats or an asterisk or something would be reasonable as compared to somebody who's just seen the movie. Oh, I saw the JFK movie. Now I know everything. So, and then there are other people who tell stories about their experiences interacting with other people who are, there's all kinds of money to be made in that area. So telling the difference between a subject matter expert and someone who just adjacently or possibly just for monetization claims that can be a tricky business. But we need to be aware of that. That's asking a lot, I know. And finally, last point of today's episode, my voice will just barely make it. Along the lines of disclosure, pushing back with clarity is essential. If you are a history professor with an expertise in a particular time period in a particular region, for example, if you are asked about a different time and place, like, oh, you're an expert in South American government formation in the on the west coast of. Do you have any insights about Greenland, other than who owns it? The professional expert or somebody with credibility in this area would say, well, that's not really my area of expertise. I'm focused on Western South America. So that doesn't always happen. But I have found that people who are most expert or who most value their credibility will point that out. Like, you know what? I don't really know that because that's not my area. Anyone can render an opinion on something, but it's important to know that I'm now rendering an opinion based on my own opinion, not on any formal training or expertise or publications or research or anything. It's important to know that. So if you do ask about a different time and place or a specific thing that's not in their purview, the responsible thing to do is point out the actual level of expertise and then the lack of in the other areas, and not to render a response that may be completely incorrect, opinion, conjecture, or something else, unless you disclose. Again, transparency is key there. Knowing what we know and how much, and making sure others know what we know and how much, are the beginnings of useful ideas, information, and insight exchange. We can do it. We can do it, I promise. As long as nobody invents AI, then who knows? But actually, the point of this entire episode really is AI has become a problem for some people. I don't care for it. But we have been we've grown so accustomed to mixing or intermingling opinion, agenda, actual fact, expertise, opinion, agendaed opinion, right? I'm here to accomplish a change of attitude. So I'm going to be a part of a team of people who's just going to make the rounds in social media and their bots. There's just an entire information fire hose pointing at people. And if we are unable to determine when someone has expertise and when they are claiming it, and when they have expertise but not in the thing that they're talking about, and so it becomes a touchy subject. And now that AI is here, AI, and don't forget, AI has been trained on all of the internet, all of the words that have been written, sometimes the videos, the transcripts. So when AI gives you a response, it is not coming up with that response. It's deriving that response from a vector of words with a likelihood of being sort of correct. That in itself is fascinating. But the take home is AI may be assigned expertise that it does not possess, not even close. And the documents that statistically form a response that you receive from a particular prompt may be based more on incorrect opinions rendered by experts. So there's an entire chain of education, I suppose, chain of opinion that has been maybe obscured. And so now, who knows what to believe? So I find this area, even though this is just a quick, we got 43 minutes so far. This is not by no means a deep dive by subject matter experts in this area, but there are people that are looking at this, the social implications of false expertise and so on. So it's something to be aware of. It's something to think about. You may think otherwise, and that's why this whole entire program exists. So I need to formalize some sort of hey, I want to debate this topic interface. But again, my website will someday be lovely and functional. Not this day, but one of the ones in the future, perhaps. That is where I'm going to call it. We got about almost 44 minutes. So we'll say 44 minutes. Should be closer to 40 with silence truncation. And that is where I'm going to leave it for today. Don't forget to listen to all of my audio programs. Find them at buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo. You don't have to pay for anything. It's all free. Because I don't know what I'm talking about. Take it easy. Bye-bye.